I don't believe we should have the freedom without the responsibility.
Okay, well, I don't think that I'm physically built for that. You might be, but I'm absolutely not.
Jesus!
Wow. No, I'm fine with that. Like, listen, I'm also like...
Wait, hold on, no, wait. I don't like that. That does sound like a dog argument, actually.
What do you mean?
No,
Also, wait, holy I don't have time to watch everything right now.
Piers Morgan, so Pearl Davis has racked up a legion of online followers and plenty of breathless newspaper coverage by sharing her incendiary views on modern feminism. The New York Post called her the female Andrew Tate, so she tapped into genuine female pushback to the excesses of wokery.
Is it actually part of the interview out?
I take it as a compliment. You know, I'm a fan of Andrew Tate.
Of everything he says?
Oh, no shot. I'm sorry, hold on.
Post called her the female Andrew Tate, so she tapped into genuine female pushback to the excesses of wokery, or is she just an attention seeker? We'll find out in a moment. But first, let's take a look at the clip that sent her viral.
A lot of people think I'm insane because I don't think women should vote. Everybody thinks I'm crazy for this opinion. If anything, this is probably my most extreme opinion. 90% of women have been on birth control. 1 out of 3 women has
abortion.
1 out of 3 women has an STD. Average body count is over 5, so that your average wife has slept with over 5 people. 95% of women are not virgins on their wedding days.
Day, yeah.
So I understand the complaint.
OK, well, Pearl joins me now alongside political journalist Ava Santini, who was nodding furiously along there to everything she heard. Right, Pearl, you've be called the female Andrew Tate. How do you plead?
Well, I take it as a compliment. You know, I'm a fan of Andrew Tate.
Of everything he says?
It depends what we're talking about, but overall, I think he's got a good message. I think he's good for young men.
OK, look, you're talking about women predominantly, which is why you've got this big following. And your view is that modern feminism is deeply flawed. I would argue a lot of your proposals, like taking the vote away from women, are deeply regressive. Why would you want to remove, just from yourself, the right to vote?
Well, what happened was I had the same view, right? Back when I started, I was like, why? I found out that only 5% of women wanted the right to vote. And I couldn't figure out, like, why would women not? No, it's true. It's true.
At the time.
At the time.
Because they've been conditioned by men to think that they shouldn't have a vote.
I mean, that's what they say. But, you know, I started reading their writings, right? And what I found out was that the reason a lot of women advocated for it was because they believed it was the beginning of the breakdown of the family. You know, before you became one in marriage, 85% of people were married. And, you know, I hate to say it, but they were right. What has happened 100 years later?
Well, what's that got to do with them having the vote?
Well, it also goes back to responsibility. Again, men are 80 to 90% of the military. They run all of the infrastructures that make society run.
The important jobs.
So I just think if we want an equal say in society, then be equal. Do 50% of the hard jobs. Be 50% of the military. In the U.S., they're fined $250,000 if they don't join selective service, which is essentially the draft.
Okay, but specifically on the vote,
necessarily
what would
the draft,
having the right to vote have to do with family cohesion, for example?
Well, because again, before you weren't trying to divide a family. It was one family unit. You had one vote for the family. I mean, I don't think it's good for a family to have 2 votes.
Ava, your mouth seems to have dropped about 3 feet.
I know.
No,
it's just sort of a bit galaxy brain. I feel like, you know, the stats that you're putting down are perhaps correct in some universe.
Which stats?
They just kind of don't really add up. I mean, just to take you back to the to the women's writings that you've allegedly read. I mean,
allegedly? What do you mean allegedly?
At the time that you're talking about, you know, women weren't really allowed to write. They weren't allowed to go to school.
Yes, they were.
Write.
Yes, they were. That's incorrect. The first
female
property owner was in the 1600s. The idea that women couldn't work and couldn't.
I'm so sorry, but that would be inherited property.
The first female millionaire was in the late 1800s.
And was that inherited?
No, it wasn't. It was self-made. Yes, it was.
Self-made.
Yes, it
and
was.
She never inherited that.
Yes, she did not
inherit it.
What
law permitted that? What law permitted that?
Well, there was no law. I mean, there's always been women that were influential in history.
Let's get on to the vote. So what I don't understand is, a part of your message. I've researched you today. And hang on a minute.
Okay.
Your big push is that that you care about men and you don't think that men are getting enough of a say. But
well, I care about
hang
women
on,
too.
I haven't made the point yet.
Okay.
Because of feminism, okay? What I wonder is when you start making calls out like repeal the 19th, women shouldn't be allowed to vote, how is that helping young men? Because these young men have women in their lives, they have mothers, they have sisters, they have teachers, and they turn around, they don't know how to act around women because you're giving them license to be misogynistic.
I wouldn't call it misogynistic. I say be equal. So again, men do all of that. Well, then, okay, I'd love for the feminists, please apply for the oil rigs. Please go do the hard jobs in society. They're open, they're hiring, because I don't I don't think men or women are equal until we do the equal work. So no, listen. Go apply to be on the oil rigs. Go be a plumber, go be an electrician, go be on the front lines of the military, and then we should have equal rights. But until feminists are willing to do that, I don't believe we should have the freedom without the responsibility.
Okay, well, I don't think that I'm physically built for that. You might be, but I'm absolutely not.
Jesus!
You said you were You said you were a volleyball player, and so you've got more strength than I do. I don't think.
But I don't have more strength. I don't have more strength than the average man.
I'm not going to take your right away.
I don't have more strength than the average man. But again, it goes back to go be a plumber. You want to be equal, go be equal.
But you want divorce to be made illegal.
Yes.
Why?
Yes, because I don't think what we have today is really marriage. What is marriage? It's for better or for worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. That's what marriage is supposed to be. But feminists have ruined marriage for the people that actually believe in marriage.
How?
When there's a 50% divorce rate, and the average marriage is 8 years.
Why is that all down to the women, though?
I didn't say that it was all down to the women.
Why feminists?
You asked why I want divorce to be banned.
Yeah.
Can I finish that first? So I'm saying, the people that believe in divorce, go be in long-term relationships. Leave marriage for the people that actually believe in for better or for worse, for richer or for poor, in sickness and in health, till death do us part.
But doesn't the sanctity of marriage also rely on the woman being a virgin, so you wouldn't be able to get married?
What do you mean?
Well, you've spoken quite openly about how you're not a virgin, and so if you want to preserve that sanctity of marriage, I just think that you're upholding standards that you don't actually live by.
And that's a fair complaint. I wish I was. But, we can't go back. I don't know what you want me to say.
Yeah, but I just don't think it's fair that you get to be here and you get to be paid for your views, and you're telling other women that they shouldn't be allowed to.
I think,
hang on. Okay, if I may, at some stage.
Bro, I just realized Piers is doing a Destiny stream. He brought on 2 people to scream at each other. He's just farming the content. Amen, brother. Amen, brother.
Jump in. Isn't the whole point of being a feminist, though, that women are entitled to have their own views?
Absolutely.
So she's perfectly entitled to her views.
Yeah, but you can't.
You might not like them.
But I'm here to challenge
Isn't she exercising her rights as a... Are you a feminist?
No, I am not.
Really?
No, I wouldn't. Don't go that far.
You don't want to be a feminist?
No, because I think if feminists really believed in equality, which you guys don't, I would love for you. There is an oil rig hiring.
I just think that if feminists believe in equality, they should do real work.
There is an engineering
I would actually love to see Ava Santana on an oil rig.
Seriously. There is a building being built next to my building. Go do it, feminists. Go do it. And me, I'm saying
the same job that I'm doing right now.
When you find the man you want to get married to, are you saying you will be with that man whatever happens the rest of your life?
Yes, for the vows that we're supposed to live by.
How do you know you can keep them?
I mean, I think it's a choice. And that's the thing, women are so willing to leave marriages because they're not happy. This is not about happiness. The most important thing is the children. And the problem is we have a modern society where it's me, my feelings, leave when I feel like it, instead of doing what's best for the kids.
Ava, I've got to say, it's a little bit listening to Andrew Tate, where some of it I really don't agree with. I don't agree with the vote stuff. When I hear things like that, I think there'll be a lot of people, especially older generation women perhaps, who think, you know what, she's got a point.
Well, I believe in agency, so I think that if a woman is going to look after her children with divorce, that's absolutely fine. I also believe in your right to speak your mind about it. What I don't understand...
I'd like to say, even before the 1920s,
do you know what I mean?
Women could speak openly. This idea that, women couldn't talk the last 500 years, there have been women throughout history...
the American state education system has failed before, and it's failing now.
There have been women throughout history that have read, written, and been very influential in society.
Okay.
So this idea like women could never do it.
Do you know what I don't understand though is when it gets spiteful, okay? Because you put down a few arguments that I think are perfectly, like, you know, they're kind of evangelical and they're Christian, but those are your right to say it. What I don't understand is when it kind of seeps into this sort of, you call women fat, you say that they shouldn't have abortions, you say that they have STDs. You know,
I mean, the question is, are they fat? Yes or no? The average American woman is 170 pounds. That's objectively overweight.
I mean, let's be honest.
What about the average American man, though?
Celebrate morbid obesity as some kind of body positive thing, and it is complete nonsense. So, actually, on that point again, there's a bit of truth in that.
And this is the problem.
How have we come to celebrate morbid obesity as body positive?
Well,
it's nonsense.
We're not talking about morbid obese. I was actually watching your podcast earlier, and you spoke to someone who was, I would say, probably a size 12, and you called her fat, obese, and a divorcee.
She was fat, obese, and a divorcee. I mean, like, I don't know what to say. This is the thing, women, we don't want to live in reality. We don't want to say things that are true. Was she fat? Yes. Was she a divorcee? Yes. These things are just objective facts.
Okay, I'm going to have to objectively...
And she insulted me first. They always do.
I'm going to have to objectively end the debate, but it was an interesting conversation. I think we should get you two back together as a matter of urgency.
Oh, it was just a 10-minute thing? I thought it was a full hour or two, I think. I think Pearl actually looked really good there. Jesus. That other girl was not... that other girl was not the one to argue with her. Holy shit. Jesus. There's probably a large one on TV later. Oh, maybe. All you do is talk over me. All you do is talk over me. The legend. Where's Haas at?
In how high regard do you hold parental rights?
Pretty high, I guess. They're your kids, right?
Yeah, so does that mean that you think that you should be able to raise your children to hate the blacks and the Jews and the homos and like object if they are taught to not do that in school?
To some extent, yeah, you're right. Those are your First Amendment rights. You can hate whoever you want, yeah.
Okay. God damn it. That's interesting because, like, I sort of feel, like, I understand that, but at the same time, there's this part of me that, like, really just wants to say, fuck it, like, kids should have to learn in school that black people are, like, that black people are not bad, and that the Jews are okay, and that it's okay to be gay and trans, and that everyone should have to learn this? Or is this just not a thing that... Because I know you talk about, like, parental rights and shit a lot.
I mean, this isn't really parental rights. We're more just, like, kind of, like, freedom of speech. Like, I don't think there's nothing wrong with teaching, like, gay people exist and, like, black people, you know, had slavery and, like, they exist and we should all, like, learn to get along and everything. But there's probably a bit of a difference between that and being like, oh, it's like good to be gay or whatever. I don't know, like normatively loading it or putting like moral weight on it.
How about it's okay to be gay, or there's nothing wrong with being gay, which I think would be the more important thing. Did you just die? I'm not watching the stream.
No, I'm just thinking. Like, you have a right to be racist in the United States or hateful. You have a right to teach your children that hate and racism as well. Like,
oh yeah, you do.
Fully within your right as an American. So I'm just trying to think like.
Yeah, that's where I'm sort of stuck with that too.
I would say like here's what I would say, like speaking in the broadest of senses, schools curriculum and the things that they teach tend to be dictated by like the school superintendent and like your school boards and everything. I think that it's probably okay to like broadly teach like some level of acceptance of like LGBT stuff, maybe. As long as you're not like too heavy-handed with it, but it's probably going to come down to the particular districts and everything as well. So,
you think that they're real? I assume you think they're being very heavy-handed with it now, even though we don't have any data on what like all we've got is like libs of TikTok shit on what is being actually taught, which is part of what makes it really annoying.
Sure, my guess is probably not much of it at all is that heavy-handed. That'd be my guess because people tend to exaggerate like small stories. My honest to God feelings about most of the LGBT stuff in school is COVID was probably the first time in the history of the United States that the majority of parents had any idea whatsoever their kids are being taught in school, and that's why they all of a sudden started freaking the out about it because they never kept up with it or never cared. So, but I mean, like, yeah, I don't know. I doubt it's like so crazy right now that like kids are being like mass indoctrinated or whatever. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, like if you're a religious person, you have a right to teach your children that like being gay is evil. But I think that like from the position of the state, like you also have a right or an obligation as a state to teach children that like we have to accept these people as being part of the country for something. I guess it would just come down to whether or not you're trying to tell people if it's good or not, which would probably be overstepping a boundary, or at the very least, like children and their parents have a right to disagree.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, like I think there's a difference between saying it's good and saying it's okay to be this thing, because I mean, is there a difference? I feel like there is, like, because being gay, saying something is good versus, I mean, sorry, not is it good? How about is it being gay is morally neutral? Is what I think probably, or is
well,
that
I mean, like realistically, this is a teacher's never going to utter those words.
Well, no, of course not. They're going to say it's okay to be gay, which I mean, to me, would translate to morally neutral.
I mean, like, here's what I would say. For the United States to work, we all have to be able to get along with each other. And if we don't like each other, so teaching some level of acceptance or tolerance is probably okay. If you've got a huge problem with that much acceptance and tolerance, you're probably not built for this country and you should go somewhere else. Like, on the broadest sense, I should say that. But now if there are teachers saying like, oh, like, you know, like, being gay is just as normal and good as being, you know, heterosexual. All these are equally morally acceptable, blah, blah, blah. If like it gets to that level, then I can understand parents taking issue with it. Because again, you would have a right to object to that as a parent. But then again, I also don't know, like, I'd have to think about, like, just because parents object to something and they're fully within their right to object to something, I don't necessarily know if that means that they have a right to dictate the curriculum either. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I was a little bit unsure about that because I mean we kind of did it, like we've like forced people who were not okay with it to swallow like accepting that certain people are going to have rights, like when they desegregated the schools in the 1950s. And I mean when that Supreme Court decision came down, Eisenhower had to send armed men to one of those schools in order to like force that integration to happen. Mm-hmm. It might have actually been to all those schools in the South, but like that was, I mean, that was like a huge thing, and it's not like that had widespread support, at least not in the South at the time. So yeah, I don't know, that's hard. But I mean, I think that's probably fair because we have the ability to, or people can send their kids to fucking like religious schools and all that kind of shit too. So, but in public school, and they also have different ways that they can object. Have you read a lot about the Supreme Court cases recently? Did you read about the LGBT one with the web designer?
I know a little bit about the facts of the case, but I haven't read any of the opinions on it yet. What about it?
Well, okay. I mean, it's funny because I was on a WIC panel last night and we argued about it, and I could not figure out, or like, there was a bunch of different takes that I wasn't sure about. Do you know about originalism? Like the conservative reading of the Constitution and the living document thing versus the living document thing?
I mean, broadly speaking, I've heard these two things, that some prefer like a very like textual original reading of the actual Constitution itself. Others have this concept of like living document, that maybe like these things can slowly change over time. There's probably some merit to both, and the arguments for both are probably a little bit more complicated than I understand, but like broadly speaking, I'm aware of what these two things mean, sure.
Okay. The arguments that the conservatives on the panel made for originalism were actually pretty good, and that like they were saying like, we just want you to read the Constitution as it is written and not do some other weird shit, or like view it in some sort of a weird way that would allow you to like sort of do mental gymnastics so that it means what you want it to mean. Like, I don't know if you know this or not, but there was the idea that you can't discriminate against that you as a business can't deny service to somebody as based on immutable characteristics and protected classes, specifically that you as a business cannot deny service, like you can't put up whites only signs or whatever. Mm-hmm. That whole thing, that's not really based in the Constitution, or like it is, but it's justified with the fucking interstate commerce clause. I could not believe this when I found this. That's what I've heard anyway. That's what, like, if you look up the Civil Rights Act, that's one of the things that they use to justify that. I mean, they also use the 14th Amendment as well, but the 14th Amendment just says all people are equal under the law, which I don't think is the same thing as businesses can't deny services to people, because that's not the law. That's about who a private business chooses to serve.
So what you're saying is true. Here's what I would suggest, okay? In the very little bit of reading that I've done, law is actually way easier to read than people think. Like, it's not all like complex legal technical jargon. Supreme Court justices, when they give speeches and when they talk to other people, are very easy to understand. If you read like the majority or the is it the minority opinion that people say, the dissent? If you read these opinions, usually they're pretty easy to understand. If somebody's ever like trying to tell you like, oh, this was just this, I seriously doubt like the majority opinion on the Civil Rights Act. Or no, fuck. I'm sorry. The Civil Rights Act was legislation. I'm sorry. But the majority opinion on any of these Supreme Court cases, it's not just going to be like, oh, interstate commerce clause or whatever. There's going to be way better justifications for it. If you're ever curious on like a particular Supreme Court decision.
There was a case that my friend told me about a long time ago that he said that was what they used to do that. And
sure, I understand. But what I'm saying is I promise there's never been a Supreme Court decision where the majority opinion was like, commerce clause, stop. Like, there's going to be way more to the justification. And like, in my opinion, you like Supreme Court justices are some of the most educated people, whether you like them or don't like them, conservative or liberal, in the United States. They know so much about this country's history. They know so much about the judicial process, so much about law. It's worth reading what they have to say, even if you disagree with them on their opinions on things. And the rationales that they give for things, I'm sure even Pisco would admit this, even if you disagree with their decision, like, the rationale is worth consideration. It's not going to be dog shit like Twitch arguments or whatever when they're talking or justifying why they rule a particular way on a thing. So I think if there's ever like a Supreme Court case that somebody presents and they're like, oh, it was so obviously fucking retarded, like, unless the guy that you're talking to is also a Supreme Court justice, chances are he's probably not in a position where he can just like write off a Supreme Court justice's opinion on why a case was ruled the way it was. It's probably worth reading the original decision, I would say.
The case in question that used the Interstate Commerce Clause actually, I think, had to do with interstate commerce more so than other stuff. What I mainly read was the Civil Rights Act. Oh my God, it's Pisco!
Hey guys.
Hi. Yeah, can you comment on this? I actually messaged you on Twitter and you never got back to me before the panel.
Oh, sorry. I had like a big log of messages that I responded to like all at once, and then everyone started responding me back. It's kind of like crazy how famous I am. I'm just kidding. But, no, I mean, I'm happy to discuss it.
Yeah, it sucks that you're not on, that you couldn't come on Wick's panel. I don't even know if he asked you or not. That was about the Supreme Court yesterday.
I don't think he asked me. I was busy with work yesterday, unfortunately. But
Lactoid was on there. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah, I know him. I know him well.
He made, I don't know, I thought he made some fairly good faith arguments, but I'm not a fucking lawyer.
Wait, so which person are you talking about? Sorry, what was the name of the person?
Lactoid.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. All right.
He's a libertarian, except he's also kind of socially conservative, depending on what you're talking about. Anyway, go on, if you have stuff to say about this. Oh, yeah.
So I was hearing some sort of, like, talk about the Civil Rights Act and how it relates to the Constitution and, like, the justifications for it.
And the Interstate Commerce Clause was apparently one of the justifications with regards to whether or not businesses can deny people services.
Well, I would separate the inquiry in two ways. Whenever Congress acts, or the federal government acts, it's assumed to be a government of limited powers, right? The states are assumed sovereigns, and they have a general police power. But everything the federal government does needs to have some foundation in the Constitution. Since Congress is a government of limited powers, it likewise has to have some justification for the power it's using. If you were listening, I'm sure you weren't, but yesterday I was talking to Rage Pope about, was it yesterday? I don't even remember.
My days all played together, yeah.
I probably missed that because I work like from Sunday to Thursday, but I can look in the VOD.
Sure, yeah. We were talking about like what authority Congress has been granted to do certain things, like purchase investments and stuff like that. So there has to be a basis in the Constitution, and that's reinforced by the 10th Amendment, which says essentially that all powers not delegated to the government, the federal government, are given and reserved to the states and the people respectively. So that's the kind of reading that we would have of the Constitution and of the legislative power, is that it's limited by what the Constitution says. So let's put that under one category and call that powers-related questions. And the second category of things, you might call that individual rights-related powers, or individual rights separate from the governmental power. So even if the Constitution grants the right for Congress to act in a certain way, there are other limits on what they can do to individuals that might infringe on their respective rights. So if you, let's say that you have the power to tax, yeah, Congress has the power to tax, but they can't tax white people less than black people, because that would violate an equal right, individual right, namely the right to equal protection. Right. So you should separate those two inquiries in your head. Is like, where does the power come from? And even if they have the power, does it violate some individual right? So that's sort of a starting framework that I would recommend for you. Do you have any questions about that?
No, I think, I understand that.
Okay.
Because, like, I mean, I did a little research stream a couple days ago where I went and read a bunch of shit about the Supreme Court. But obviously, like, I missed a lot of
ringing. Just give me a second.
legalese. Uh-oh.
What did he say?
He said his phone's ringing. He's probably getting a call from his high-powered lawyer job.
Based.
Yeah. I'm just gonna wait for him to come back, I guess. I have about 9 minutes.
My bad, I had a package.
Oh, okay.
You were saying you did some research.
Yeah, I did. Mostly I was just curious about certain things. And like I also wanted to like just look at what was in the Constitution, both regarding the Supreme Court and other stuff. And I found like the 14th Amendment, and that was used as justification, or an updated justification, for Brown versus Board of Education, because they said that segregation like was not making black people equal under, like, it was not treating them equally. But the Plessy v. Ferguson separate but equal thing was like, like they changed their mind on that basically and struck that down.
Yeah,
because that wasn't like a real thing.
Remember when the 14th Amendment was passed? That was in like the 1860s.
Yeah, that was the
Reconstruction Amendments.
Yeah.
And Plessy comes down in like the 1890s, and so there is the Equal Protection Clause at that time, but there's this notion that it doesn't require, like, separation isn't inherently making a particular class worse off. And you can think, if you sort of think in the kind of abstract, is it the case that separation inherently is a burden on a class? That would be, if you were part of the Plessy majority, you would say they're not worse off, right? We're not saying that there's no law that says the bathrooms will be worse for black people, otherwise we'd strike it down. It's just saying the black bathrooms will be separate from white bathrooms.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of logic of Plessy. But when you get into the civil rights, first of all, I would recommend you not get your constitutional interpretational skills from Lactoid, because I think that he and many other originalists are woefully sorry, doorbell.
Pisco,
woefully
you work in Miami.
Really,
my firm is looking for litigators in Florida.
In my opinion, and are sort of giving and sending the wrong message. That said, I'm interested in why you think it's so preposterous that the Civil Rights Act is backed up from a powers perspective by the Interstate Commerce Clause.
Because I feel like it's kind of weird to say that to use like a portion of the Constitution about interstate commerce instead of the Constitution just having a thing that says that all people are that it, like, the thing that's like, there's no the Equal Rights Amendment. Do you remember the Equal Rights Amendment? Even though that was never passed. Like, it's just weird to me that the Constitution doesn't have something like that. Although, obviously, there are problems with that, and there are certain things that would have to change about it, and it would have to be expanded so it's not just about sex. It's just weird to me that it's not in there, and that they had to go to the Interstate Commerce Clause. That's all. Yeah.
As a usual thing, when you're reading the Constitution, there's very little parts of the Constitution that regulate private conduct. And let's be clear, if there's any sort of public bad treatment or any kind of like sign on government property that would say like black people are not allowed here or whatever,
then that would be different.
Yeah, because the 14th Amendment and most of the provisions of the Constitution apply to government actors, and that includes the guarantee of equal protection. That doesn't prevent private discrimination. It just doesn't have anything to speak about it. And so you wouldn't expect most of the Constitution, like there's some parts that do apply to private people. Slavery, the 13th Amendment, you can't have slaves. That applies to government actors, and except to the extent that there's prisons, there's a carve out for prisons and forced laborers after a conviction and stuff like that. But that regulates private conduct. When we had the prohibition on alcohol, that also regulated certain private conduct.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, and then they took it away. I think that was like one amendment right after the other or something. They amended the Constitution to prohibit alcohol, and then they amended it again to allow alcohol, I think. It's funny that they managed to do that instead of just passing a law about it.
Well, that's kind of like the point. The Constitution is not necessarily to regulate day-to-day conduct of private individuals. That's the point of laws. And so I'm not that surprised that the Constitution doesn't regulate private discrimination. It's supposed to regulate the structure of the government and how we would pass laws to address it. And so I would separate the question about the Civil Rights Act in kind of two ways. One, does Congress even have the power to do this? And two, does it violate some individual right? Probably the most salient of which would be First Amendment, right? You would say, my decision to hire somebody based on race is a First Amendment, expressive association, or I have a First Amendment right to put up signs on my hotel that say Jews are not allowed, and that any statute that purports to take away that right is in violation of the First Amendment. So those are kind of the two things that anyone who's in support of the Civil Rights Act has to answer. How can Congress have this ability? And if it does have this ability, does it violate other parts of the Constitution?
Yeah.
Step one that you have a problem with is the Interstate Commerce Clause. That's a justification for Congress's authority to even act in this space. And the rationale is essentially, what is interstate commerce, and where does this power end in terms of Interstate Commerce Clause? Because surely you would agree, and the language in the case law has been that Congress can regulate instrumentalities and channels of interstate commerce. So when we're talking about literal roads between states, those are things that are clearly under the ambit of the Commerce Clause. Agreed? Like if the right to regulate trade between the states.
Yeah, because that's between state. Yeah. Okay. Although it is just the Commerce Clause. Like it describes commerce like in general. It looks like not just between two states.
So where is the authority, for example, for Congress to react to, like, let's say a pandemic like COVID? Let's say that there's a pandemic that's affecting everyone in the country, and Congress wants to enact measures to prevent that from spreading. And one thing they might do is like require that everyone who uses the airports to travel between states are vaccinated, right? Let's say they pass a law for that. And assume for a second that there's no individual rights aspect to it.
Well, I mean, you could argue that there is, but morally I would disagree with that, but legally I'm not sure what I would say. Morally,
is that commerce? Is that regulating commerce? Right? Is Congress stepping in to address a pandemic that has a huge effect on commerce, right? This pandemic, if it keeps going, is going to significantly curtail interstate commerce.
Yeah.
Right?
Was that the justification that they used for that?
I'm not pointing to any particular policy or case. There's been a lot of statute. So to give you an example, there was an act by the Biden administration to have an eviction moratorium. And that eviction moratorium, there was a statutory basis of that authority that the court said that there was the major questions doctrine, same thing that they did in the student loan case. And they said that wasn't a worthwhile statutory justification. But even if Congress had authorized the president to do an eviction moratorium, is a nationwide eviction moratorium, is that commerce that you're regulating? Interstate commerce? It has a huge effect on interstate commerce, right? Think about everyone. The question becomes what is a limiting principle? If commerce is connected to pretty much every facet of human activity, are there any sort of articulable principles to limit Congress's authority to act using the Interstate Commerce Clause? And there's been a ton of case law. If you recall the Affordable Care Act case, where the argument was can Congress force you to buy insurance?
He said it was a tax. I think that was one of Roberts's, or you can see it as a tax. That was one of Roberts's, or I think his main justification, or I don't remember if he wrote the opinion, the majority. Okay.
It was like the controlling opinion because he didn't get 5 people, but he was controlling. But 5 Supreme Court justices said that forcing people to buy insurance was not a proper use of the Interstate Commerce Clause, and that was the difficult question. So now understand that there's some. I don't want to necessarily get into the weeds about it, but there are some limits that the court's going to impose on interstate commerce, and there's some lower, not directly channels or instrumentalities of interstate commerce, but just effects, some kind of effect on interstate commerce significant enough that the court will say that's a proper exercise of the Interstate Commerce Clause. Now go back to like the civil rights era. The fact that tons of states and private organizations in those states are having segregation prevents black commerce, or to the extent that you can call something black commerce, or black people from coming and using the highways to get to those states to sell goods there, right? You're preventing significant amounts of travel through the highways to get to those places, and it's having a huge effect on interstate commerce. And so the rationale for the power to force people, for example, not to fire you because you're black, is it's a proper exercise of Congress's authority in the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate something that would otherwise have a humongous effect, and did have a humongous effect on interstate commerce.
Oh, okay,
directly.
Yeah.
You don't like that?
No, just a sec.
Yeah.
No. I'm fine with that. Like, listen, I'm also like.
Wait, hold on. No, wait. I don't like that. That does sound like a dog shit argument, actually.
What do you mean?
Oh
I feel like you could theoretically then stretch that to encompass basically any First Amendment restriction you ever could possibly want.
Yeah, I was going to say that is kind of, but I understand at the time of the Civil Rights Act why they chose to do that. But my problem is that it sucks. Like, I still think that we need a fucking Equal Rights Amendment instead of like this weird shit.
Well, wait, hold on, wait. What I'm curious on that, let's say that let's say people are doing a bunch of, do you agree that like Nazis or the KKK have a right to do protests and demonstrations? Yes. Okay, let's say that they do protests and demonstrations so much in towns it starts to drive down business because black or Jewish customers don't want to visit. Is this all of a sudden like interstate commerce? I can restrict your First Amendment right because I think it has a negative impact on...
I would raise 2 things. So first of all, I would allow that to occur. I'd raise 2 things. Number 1, the Civil Rights Act is limited in which private activities it's addressing. It's not addressing just people being racist in the South. It's addressing hiring decisions, firing decisions, decisions on what signs you can put up in public accommodations for public-facing businesses. And so how the court has understand that is it's targeting, quote, economic activity. Now, you can... The lines here are going to be always open to interpretation about what you draw as, quote, economic activity and non-economic activity. But you can distinguish that from, like, general Nazism or general racism, right? That's number 1. Okay. That's the powers question, to distinguish the regulation from affecting economic activity from non-economic activity. And then you have the additional individual rights question, which is, I think, at issue in the Colorado website case, is what's going on here is a hiring decision, is a decision to put up a sign saying we don't deal with black people, or we don't deal with Jewish people or women. Are those expressive activities? Do they fall under the First Amendment? And that's the... Go ahead.
In that case, it wasn't that, though. Like, in that case, she was objecting to having to engage in creative expression, making a website for something that she didn't agree with. Which,
the party stipulated that it was expressive, which you can query whether or not it was a smart thing for Colorado's lawyers to stipulate that this was expressive. But you don't have First Amendment protections unless it's regulating speech or expressive conduct. So imagine this. If I say that I want to drive drunk and I have a First Amendment right to drive drunk, are you going to respect that? No, because it's not speech. It's not expressive. What if I say, like, this is artistic? It's artistic for me to kill people in the way I want to kill people. It's artistic when I drive drunk in that way, and that's my creative expression. Are you going to respect, is the First Amendment going to protect that kind of thing? No. And so, like, ultimately, courts will have to get into the role of deciding what is expressive and what is not expressive. and that seems difficult given our like art conversation. Remember when we were trying to define like what is art, what's not art?
Yeah.
You know, what is speech, what is not speech? Is burning your draft card speech? Right? Is that expressive conduct? Is burning a flag speech? What about burning your neighbor's house? What are the lines between those?
Oh, well, I mean, like I could answer some of those, but yeah. Well, your neighbor's house is not your property, so no, you can't do that. If the flag that you are burning is your flag, then it's fine.
Right. So like,
yeah.
So assuming that you have access to, but there could be an ordinance that prevents you from burning your own stuff, right? Let's say there's a state could pass, assuming away the powers questions, if we're dealing now with a state. That's always easier, by the way, guys. If you want to test a constitutional issue,
why don't we ask that dude what the Archie says about free speech? That Destiny,
deal with the powers
when you play D&D, can we buy
it
into a playthrough?
The interstate commerce clause. Pretend that the state says it shall be illegal in this state to do X thing, and now you're just left with the First Amendment or whatever the constitutional question is, individual rights question. If you are, pass a regulation that says you are not allowed to set fire to anything in this town because we have a huge risk of wildfires, and so we're not letting anybody burn anything, right? And you're like, but wait, I was planning on burning this cross tomorrow as part of my KKK rally. Is that an infringement on your First Amendment rights? These are the kind of questions that courts will ultimately have to decide about whether something is expressive conduct, and even if it is expressive conduct, whether or not there's a compelling, a strict scrutiny analysis if it's a content-based restriction on speech that you're doing. So in the case of the Civil Rights Act, you might say, this is not expressive. The regular decisions about whether to hire someone for a not expressive association, when you're not talking about hiring someone to be the secretary for the Nazi Party, the American Nazi Party, you're hiring someone to be a cashier. That the act of hiring is not expressive. It's uncomfortable that are the lines.
How do you draw the lines when you get into the really weird areas around like baking cakes or making websites?
Yeah, because that's the part where I got torn about it.
Right. So.
And then just so you know, as you answer this question, because then my next question is going to be like, what if people do menial tasks in an expressive way? So for instance, I'm going to ask you this website one, I'm curious your answers, and I'm going to say, what if somebody does like an oil change, but there's like a 2-second dance before they swap the filters? Does this become an artistic expression that I can start, essentially engage in discrimination on,
Yeah, that's the kind of issue with, you could take the, I don't know, the position that the websites are not expressive, right? Or sorry, are expressive. That would be the one-way ratchet up for Gorsuch's opinion. That Kagan, or sorry, that Sotomayor is accusing that there's an exception now to all the civil rights related statutes and protections for public accommodations if you just like bundle whatever you're doing with something that's like inarguably expressive. What becomes? I don't have great answers for you in the sense of like, I think that if I were to ask myself, is creating a website like what is contemplated for like a wedding inherently expressive? I would say, as was contemplated, probably yes, right? If you're asking me, should we be able to force artists to make paintings for stuff they disagree with? Like, suppose that you could like force an artist to draw like
an LGBT that obviously seems like it should be wrong.
It's a horrible reality, right? And like, I don't really see a humongous distinction I think all of these cases are going to be case by case. It's a totality of circumstances about whether or not it's truly expressive in a way that we should respect, and that's a kind of norms thing that judges are going to have to decide. And if you look at yourself in the mirror, the only other way to get around this is to say that we don't decide whether something is expressive or not. But then, that exception for First Amendment purposes exists for everything, right? A First Amendment exception to punching someone in the face, a First Amendment exception to being naked anywhere you want at any time. At some point, the court is going to have to draw a line on what counts as speech and what doesn't count as speech, and what gets protection and what does. And that problem exists whether or not you you have these cake cases or you have these website cases. At some point, the court's going to have to step in and say, this is not expressive enough to be considered speech. Because I don't see any other way around that, unless you want to define, make a big code about what is speech. If you're just leaving it there, if you just say the freedom of speech shall not be abridged, that's all the Constitution says. It doesn't say video games, doesn't say streaming. But what if the government says you're not allowed to stream anymore, Destiny? And you're like, but wait, this is my speech. And you're like, well, and they're like, well, no, this is not speech, because speech at the time of the Constitution was just oral things, like not including streaming. We're not stopping you from speaking. We're just stopping you from streaming, right? And like, what level of generality you want to apply speech to? Is it the communication of ideas? Is it just spoken word? Does it include written private communications? Like if I send a letter, could they pass a law that says you are not allowed to send private emails anymore? Is that a violation of the freedom of speech? These are tough questions, but I think ultimately the inquiry that needs to be: is it expressive or is it not expressive? Is it intended? And some part of that will I think ultimately be determined by the intent of the actor doing it. If you're accidentally, making art that's not, that you're not trying to, I don't think that's speech, and it kind of gets into our art conversation a little bit. But yeah, tough questions. I think that actually the simpler question is the powers question about whether or not Congress has the authority to even regulate interstate hirings and shit like that. Once you get over that, though, the harder one is like, let's say that you have a Democratic Party and you have to hire insiders or you have to hire staff members, and you find out that someone's a secret Republican. Is it okay to fire someone for being a Republican? If you're a Democratic insider, would that violate and assume that there was a law that prohibited hirings and firings based on political speech or political opinion? You can imagine maybe a Republican government in a state doing that.
Okay, yeah, so I think, I feel like now I have at least a little bit more of an understanding of this, although I still am not sure, maybe I'm just, in terms of economics, not necessarily, economics is my biggest weakness. It's actually funny, the most I've learned more about economics, Destiny, from watching your stream than I ever did when I was at university, because I never took any econ classes.
Well, you're probably not going to learn very much of econ if you don't take any econ classes. Yeah.
Well, no, yeah, I know, but I also never, I don't know, anytime, I feel like you had a way of explaining it that was considerably better than any other time that anytime anyone else ever tried to explain it, or what. I don't know, you're just really good at explaining things, okay? Anyway, but, so, with the, mainly what I'm talking about discrimination in businesses, I'm talking about, someone putting up a sign that says whites only at, let's say, their convenience store, and it says they will only serve white people there, and their convenience store,
that's banned in most states, right? For most places.
Yeah, but is it banned? Yeah, but it wasn't necessarily banned in the southern states when they passed the Civil Rights Act. That's what public accommodation laws are for, right?
Right. Yeah, it certainly wasn't banned back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, but in what way? I guess do
you have a problem with that?
No, of course not. Yeah. I think that should be a thing, and that's why I was saying that I felt like an equal rights amendment was necessary if the only justification for that was the fucking interstate commerce clause.
But there's a separate thing where assume the state itself, what we're dealing in Colorado is a state law, and so there's no interstate commerce clause issue there, right?
I know you're talking about a state law, and that's a different thing. But
people can get mad and ask mad about the interstate commerce clause. It's an incredibly large source of authority for most of the stuff that Congress, a lot of the stuff that Congress does that's not spending, it will come from the interstate commerce clause. It's a lot of stuff that people like too, that Republicans like. It comes from the interstate commerce clause, the ability to regulate interstate commerce.
Do you think that there are arguments against using the Interstate Commerce Clause as justification for federal public accommodation laws, like arguments that originalists, for example, would make, because I feel like that, like, or that they
I just saw a Confederate float in the 4th of July parade at PLC Hell.
Or whatever.
So recall the originalist argument that would be applied to this thing. It wouldn't be originalism as the 1960 whatever Civil Rights Act, whichever one you're talking about. It would be originalism as respect to what?
Like what is written in the Constitution specifically.
Yeah. Which part?
Well, I mean,
the Interstate Commerce Clause. That's what you'd be applying originalism to. And the question would be, at the time that this clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, was passed, what did people in the moment think that the words of that meant? And you would be looking at like history and dictionaries for trying to figure out what the literal words regulate interstate commerce meant. And
it is so short. If anyone's wondering, it literally just says the Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and amongst the several states and with the Indian tribes.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah,
that's
a lot of our laws like that.
thing.
Believe it or not, we had a whole thing recently about the words waive or modify.
Yeah, no. So
well, look at the Second Amendment. Look at all of the contention around that.
Oh,
exactly.
that is, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel like that one's pretty cut and dry, honestly. I really do think that, like, it says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I really can't, in my head, like, find a way around that. But maybe peacefully.
I mean, the first clause, well-regulated militia being necessary to. So even that sentence is a little bit confusing, right?
I think the way that, it's the way that it's written in with and the grammar. It makes it more confusing because of the well-regulated militia part. But people will look at the rest of it. I also think the Establishment Clause with regards to like separation of church and state and freedom of religion is pretty cut and dry too. But there are conservatives who will disagree with that shit, who don't even think separation of church and state exists. So
these are really, really difficult questions. And one thing that's made more difficult is the fact that at the time that the Second Amendment was drafted, among others, if you're taking an originalist perspective, no one thought the Second Amendment applied to the states. Nobody. Nobody thought any of these Bill of Rights protections applied to the states. The amendments were there for the states' protection. The amendments didn't apply to the states. It was meant to apply to the federal government. And so it makes total sense. Right? States could ban all guns if they wanted to for non-militia havers, because the Second Amendment just did not apply to the states. And so if you're taking an originalist perspective, then there should be no basis under which to challenge New York State's law banning guns, right? Maybe there's a basis to challenge if you believe in an individual right to, you think the Second Amendment applies to individual rights as opposed to militia-based rights, then maybe there's a basis to apply it in the Heller case in DC. But as originally intended, the Second Amendment did not apply to the states.
Was there not a Supreme Court case, or was there not something that did make it apply to all the states, though? Like, eventually, didn't they amend or do something with that, I think?
How conservatives get around that, right? How people get around that is they invoke substantive due process. And they say, well, the 14th Amendment, when they said liberty in the 14th Amendment, that liberty meant the freedoms that we like. That liberty meant we're going to apply to the states all the Bill of Rights protections. And keep in mind that at the time that the 14th Amendment was passed, do you think, right, if you're taking an originalist perspective, that what they thought they were doing was applying all of the Bill of Rights to the states? Is that what we thought was happening? If so, that's pretty weird word usage to do that. And it's exactly the same justification for the kind of implied liberty analysis that's going on in Roe v. Wade. Exactly the same. Is that there are implied rights by this liberty thing, either incorporated rights from the Bill of Rights or incorporated from our, things that are deeply rooted in our history and tradition, call that a substantive right to bodily autonomy or to bear and beget a child. That's the kind of analysis that for so long conservatives and originalists have taken issue with, is people reading liberty clauses capaciously and allowing for them to encompass things beyond what their like traditional ordinary meaning would say. But that's exactly how they would apply the Second Amendment to. And keep in mind, that application to the states is fairly recent. The McDonald case was in 2009 or 10. That's the first time the Second Amendment was applied to state activity from the Supreme Court. So yeah, it's like that's the kind of, I think, the frame the originalist mind gets you into. It gets you into the job of a historian, and judges are historically very bad historians, I think, in my opinion. There are recent cases dealing with the precedent that New York Pistol and Rifle Association, where better historical analysis than what Clarence Thomas offers is being offered by district courts. And if that's what we're doing, why do we have judges? We should just get a bunch of historians. Judges lack the kind of skills and training that historians do to properly contextualize certain history. They'll pick and choose whatever they want, and they'll do exactly what originalists are afraid of, I guess, living constitutionalists from doing, which is, they just pick and choose, and it's just policy. It's all policy from the originalists. They pick and choose which history they like, how much context to apply it, how broad or general they want to interpret what's going on there, so as to get to the result they want. That's my take.
Oh, hey, Zonia.
Hello. I'll go ahead and say what you're going to say, and then I'll cut in.
Okay, I actually have to, I really should go back to work. I feel like that's not necessarily how Lactoid explained it, but that probably is what it ends up being in general, because, like, he said, like...
Of course he wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, maybe he sees it a little bit differently. Like, the way that he defined it was probably, like, the most non-stupid version of originalism that I had heard, which is just like, this is what the Constitution says, and we're going to read it as it is written or whatever. But, I mean...
That's how they sell it. They sell it that way, but it never turns out that way. And you have this historical analysis that for some reason, it's like horrible when living constitutionalists, that's their, by the way, that's their slur that they use against people who are like purposivists or non-originalists. They'll say living constitutionalists. They'll be like, I can't believe this living constitutionalist is citing Socrates and Aristotle, but then, like, without batting an eyelash, is going to cite like Renaissance thinkers. That's Alito and Dobbs. Like, they're citing whatever history they want that builds their narrative, they'll do. And originalists do that all the time. It's an excuse, it's a meme to do exactly the thing that they're accusing non-originalists of engaging, well, in my opinion.
Like, I agree that originalists will often, like, they'll cherry pick effectively, right? And they'll cherry pick based on their own personal biases. But I think some element of originalism is actually very important, because one of the most important things I think to recognize about the Bill of Rights in particular is that the Bill of Rights effectively say, particularly the Ninth Amendment, outlines that all your rights are effectively inborn. It's an Enlightenment concept that the Anti-Federalists were making sure to bake into the Constitution, which is why something that, like, for instance, the Second Amendment could easily apply to states as well, because your right to be armed and to fight is inborn to you. And so it's something that is enshrined as a protection explicitly. But the Ninth Amendment clearly calls out that even rights that aren't enumerated in the Constitution are protected. They are inborn.
Don't look now, but you're doing Roe v. Wade analysis. You're doing Griswold. You're doing penumbras of liberty as you speak. Mm-hmm. You're doing the same thing, which you're saying that there's like some kind of natural law or implied law that's like fixed in our history or tradition or somewhere.
And this is pretty clearly called out in the writings of at the time, right? So this is something that was pretty well documented, pretty well understood, and it was obvious that the Anti-Federalists were trying to make sure that was baked into the Constitution and understanding of that.
You think it was understood at the time of the passage of the Second Amendment that would limit states' ability to regulate guns? If that's true, if that's what you think, that's weird, because Texas is one of the first states in the Union to like have wide sweeping state bans on gun ownership in the country. There were some racial purposes behind that ban, but that was no one understood the Second Amendment to limit the states. Well, and so what you're saying is that there's a level of abstraction or generality we should like imply there. But if we're doing originalism, the originalists would never say that. The First Amendment says Congress shall pass no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It says Congress. Mm-hmm. It specifies that the constitutional actor that it's speaking to, that is Congress. And for someone to be like, well, the First Amendment was intended to apply to the states too, then you're not doing textualism. Then you're doing purposivism. Then you're doing some greater idea, or like, what was the purpose behind having the First Amendment in the first place? And does it make sense to extend that to the states? It's not textualism, in my opinion.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry, before I actually have to leave soon, okay. And then like I'll let you and Pisco, or like you and Pisco can like keep talking. Zonia, I just have one last question. Pisco, do you think that having an equal rights amendment would be a good idea in order to get around some of this shit?
I do and I don't. So if you're referring to what was passed around in the states and what was purported to be ratified by many states,
I mean,
I haven't done a lot of reading or thinking about that. I think that there's probably some room to explicitly protect, for instance, LGBT individuals, which I don't think under this court that they'll protect it under an equal protection analysis, at least not to the same degree that minorities or alienage under state scrutiny. So I think that there's definitely room to be more clear about who's protected by what.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because like I guess that's kind of like what I thought, because in the meantime, instead, like we get progressives saying that we should just abolish the Supreme Court or pack it full of people or do all this other shit. Like that's what
Pisco believes that, by the way.
Oh yeah, I think we should expand the court for sure.
God damn it! I don't think that's a good idea, but that's just because that I feel like the Republicans would then just come in and do it harder, and I also don't think that there's broad support for it. Like pragmatically, I feel like that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, the Equal Rights Amendment won't happen either. I don't think there's broad support.
Yeah, probably not now, which is interesting. But I feel like there's at least a path to maybe one day get there, but not now. There's no way that that would happen anytime soon because of how insanely like polarized everything has gotten. So there's no way that that would be a thing right now. Like it sucks that we almost they almost got there, and then fucking Phyllis Schlafly came in with all the conservative women and ruined it. Although there were problems with the original ERA, but yeah, there was no compromises that they wanted to make there. They just wanted to kill it, and that's unfortunate. But yeah, I don't know. You've given me a lot to think about. Thank you. Yeah. That's cool.
No problem.
It's always interesting. It was great talking to y'all. DGGL, and also Yi wins and fuck Pepe. Bye, guys.
God. See you later.
Oh my goodness.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with your assessment there, but I think that's sort of where originalism can be applied pretty effectively, right? Like a good example of that would be the prohibition, right? Looked at from an originalist perspective, it seems like a pretty like an abomination to
you got it wrong
create
about
that
airsoft.
kind of amendment,
I play both
because it
airsoft
effectively
and paintball, and
violates the nature
weapons can leave marks and
of
can
what
break
was
skin if we are
established
close
by
enough.
the Bill of
That's
Rights.
why we have a surrender rule.
Pause there. How can originalists take
softer.
issue with prohibition amendment?
Well, if your assumption is that it is built upon the Enlightenment principle that all rights are inborn, and that is effectively the protection of that is enshrined in the Constitution, particularly the 9th Amendment, even the non-enumerated rights, then it stands to reason that that document would be left open to allow people to fight back against the states when they limit their inborn rights.
That doesn't feel like originalism. Originalism is a form of textualism, a way of reading constitutional text and even some statutory text. But what you're saying is that the Constitution,
both, because they have to use the thinking at the time as a key in which to assess what was
text.
written.
Yeah. So you read the text first. Originalists will always read the text first, and there are different forms of originalism and what things you consider.
But need the lens of what was being discussed at the time and what the principles of the people who were discussing it at the time.
Yeah. Usually, but what you're suggesting is something more akin to the extent that the Constitution diverges from Enlightenment principles. It's not what originalism would want, but originalism has in place.
Does specifically, not so much the Constitution itself, but the Bill of Rights sets the precedence there.
Well, but the Prohibition Amendment, that's an amendment that was passed pursuant to the amendment procedures laid out originally in the Constitution, as everyone understood that the amendment procedures to be, and it was in the text of the prohibition was clear. And so, how can an originalist take issue with prohibition, other than policy?
They would have to through the lens of the Bill of Rights at the time, right? So when you're reading the words of, like, for instance, the Ninth Amendment, you're not reading the words of the Ninth Amendment abstract what they were talking about at the time and what they were thinking at the time. You're reading it through the lens of the Enlightenment principles that the Anti-Federalists lived by, and all of the writings of it.
Could you get rid of the Ninth Amendment? Can we amend the Ninth Amendment away?
Technically, you could, but that would probably, in an originalist perspective, be in violation of the spirit in which the Ninth Amendment was written in the first place.
You're saying an originalist would take a duly...
that they should if they're being true to being originalists. So obviously, as I established earlier, they will pick and choose. They'll cherry pick based on their own biases. But if we talk about, like, if we hear what they say about how it is that they interpret the original language, they talk about interpreting it in the context of what they were speaking of at the time, what was going on.
Now there's new language, and now there's new people speaking who are passing according to amendment procedures that reference, of course, the constitutional language that was originally enacted. But now there's a new frame of reference for the originalists to take a perspective on. That is the people who are hypothetically repealing the Ninth Amendment. And so I don't have any reason to... Yeah, I'm okay. Excuse me. I don't have any reason to think that an originalist would take issue on a constitutional interpretation frame with a amendment which gets rid of the Ninth Amendment.
Their originalism isn't based on the current context. It's based on, okay, the change or the way in which you're interpreting something. You're interpreting it based... So if we take into consideration the Ninth Amendment's establishing effectively that all rights are inborn, which is the Enlightenment principle that the Anti-Federalists were trying to enshrine into the Bill of Rights at the time.
I don't agree with that reading that amendment, by the way.
I do. Okay. So that's my take on it. That's been my interpretation for a while after reading a lot into what it was that was being argued for by the Anti-Federalists and by Enlightenment thinkers at the time. It seems pretty reasonable that is effectively what that document.
I don't know what has to do with originalism, though. I mean, like, originalists would...
Well, because if you modify if you do any modifications or any interpretations of latter amendments to the Constitution today, you would still have to go back to the original thinking of the Bill of Rights that dictates everything going forward.
Why? I mean, the Constitution predates the Bill of Rights.
But then when they changed that, they enshrined in it those principles.
Okay, right? So we change it again. We change the Ninth Amendment. Couldn't we pass consistent with originalism?
Wait, did you say oh my God, hold on, wait, basic law question, sorry, because I'm retarded. Wait, you said the Constitution predates the Bill of Rights?
Yeah.
I thought the ratification of the Constitution was dependent upon the ratification of the Bill of Rights.
Nope. It was ratified first, and then it was many years later, like a decade later, that the Bill of Rights was finally ratified as part of the Constitution. But it was something that they had been working on and fighting over for quite a long time.
I thought that the states wouldn't have agreed to come together if it wasn't for the Bill of Rights. I thought it was a huge, that was like the selling point to bring some people on board, no?
Sorry, I mean, this is why...
James Madison. So Madison said he was gonna do the Bill of Rights, but it was ratified. It is the case that the Constitution was ratified before ratification of the Bill of Rights. Do you think it's constitutional to amend the Constitution to get rid of the Bill of Rights?
Is it constitutional? Technically, yes.
Would an originalist think it's constitutional to pass an amendment getting rid of the First 10 Amendments?
No, I don't think that they would.
That's stupid. Come on.
Ooh.
Why? Why though?
Because an originalist, at least as they say, are supposed to take a look at the enactors of certain constitutional text.
Not just any enactors, but those who set the tone of the Constitution.
Yeah. So if in 2023,
think about who put their signatures to that, right? Who did you have? You had the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, even long before the Bill of Rights was ratified, and there was a lot of battle between them about how it was that they were even going to form a government in the first place, and it was known that they were going to be introducing a bill of many rights. And one of the bills that they capped off with toward the very end there was that, by the way, not all rights enumerated in here are just because the rights aren't enumerated in here doesn't mean that they're protected, which clearly brings in that Enlightenment concept of all rights are naturally inborn to you.
Okay, I don't really know why.
So I think that sets a pretty clear tone for the precedent of the Constitution and the direction in which it's going.
people, the framers originally also gave us the right in the future to change that vision. Hence, they enacted the amendment provisions of the Constitution. And they also envisioned in the original conception of the Constitution that what we decide in terms of natural law or not natural law or the First Amendment, that could change. And they gave us the process and the procedures to do that. And so anything that you say about the original design of the Constitution includes in it the power to amend that vision and amend that Constitution, and it gives a process for it. And so I just don't understand. I don't understand why it's relevant to the broader conversation we're having about, I don't know, styles of interpretation, but like it just seems bizarre that an originalist would take issue with a duly enacted amendment getting rid of the Second Amendment, let's say, right?
Yeah, I think that probably. So you're basically saying that as the culture of the country changes, that changes obviously the context in which we're making these decisions to amend the Constitution, and because baked into the Constitution is the ability to amend it, effectively an originalist would have to be okay with overall societies moving in a or the countries moving in a direction that could
not okay with the movement,
restructure.
Okay. Not okay with the movement, but not seeing a contradiction in a...
Okay, sure, yeah. Not being consistent, they wouldn't see a contradiction. They may disagree with the overall cultural shift, but they would still have to agree with...
It would be allowed to repeal the first two.
I think with an originalist perspective, they're kind of baking in the foundings of the country and the Constitution along with it, right? I'm not necessarily an originalist. I recognize there's some value in originalism, but I think that they're kind of baking in that, oh, well, these are the original principles upon which we built the country. And so us trying to do things that are radically different may end up violating the original principles.
You know who CTV is?
Yeah.
CTV, I once had a conversation similar to CTV, like, well, Pisco, anytime you try to change the Second Amendment, that would violate the, whatever, of the spirit of the founders. They specifically put the Second Amendment, like, the overriding desire of the framers of the Constitution was to have a union that endured and have a union that stood the test of time and that was strong and vigorous. That was their overall arching plan. And pursuant to that agenda, they created and crafted procedures to modify the Constitution. And originalists should respect duly enacted constitutional provisions. That's why when you ask originalists how they interpret the 14th Amendment, they're not looking at the time of the founding. They're looking in the 1860s. If you ask an originalist about how to interpret amendments related to, I don't know, the amendment that grants people 18 and over the right to vote, they're going to look at the time that particular constitutional text was enacted. It's not this like adherence, undyingly to the founders. It's the time that the provisions are applied. What do the text of the words mean? And what you're proposing, I think, is not originalist, and it's not really textualism.
Now, I'm not going to say that originalists are well versed on Enlightenment thinking, like specifically American Enlightenment thinking of the time. But if an originalist saw the Bill of Rights as establishing a tone, particularly the Ninth Amendment establishing a tone, that the Constitution should always be interpreted through an Enlightenment thinking lens, would that not necessarily, would they be correct then in continuously going back to those? No,
because then a future citizenry has the right to change that Enlightenment lens, unless you think that the Constitution thinks that they should always view it in an Enlightenment, whatever you're defining as an Enlightenment era lens. And that seems totally at odds with the words they wrote with respect to amendment provisions, right? You could amend the Constitution to make a king, a constitutional monarchy, couldn't you?
Yeah, Alexander Hamilton would have enjoyed that.
Yeah, so how can we say, we can make an amendment to get rid of Congress or to change it in a radical way, or you can make an amendment to get rid of states if you wanted to, couldn't you?
That probably would be such a foundational break in the underpinnings of the Constitution. I think you'd have to kind of go in a whole different direction. You would have to dissolve the entire Constitution and start over, I think, to get to that point.
Why? What limit
Because the Constitution is built upon the idea that you're buying into a federation of states. So how would you do that?
You pass an amendment pursuant, you're saying that it's
effectively rewriting it from the ground up at that point. Why not?
Could you make a constitutional amendment to get rid of Canada? I'm sorry. California.
We should definitely do that.
Pass an amendment.
So nice to them. We should have absorbed them ages ago.
Wait, actually, can I ask this question? Could you write a constitutional amendment to just change one amendment that says we've changed this government from a government of enumerated powers to a government of implied powers, or completely 180 it? Could you pass an amendment doing that?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
Yeah, you probably could, but there's so much you can't effectively, there's no way to effectively nullify what's already in the Constitution. You have to amend the wording. So, for instance, the prohibition, the 21st Amendment to repeal prohibition had to effectively move the language forward. It couldn't just say, I forget what the wording is, but it can't basically say that the original amendment, what was it, the 19th Amendment, doesn't exist anymore. It can't just nullify the whole thing.
Why not? It could. They chose a particular way to do it because it's it would be annoying to be no one shall speak of this amendment anymore, and we're all going to act as though the amendment never existed, and all references to that, no human being shall reference that. So there's a reason why they did it the way they did. But later in time prevails, right? If you pass a law that contradicts a previous law, I would think that you would agree that the later in time provision prevails over the former in time.
Yeah, well, you're constantly amending, but
you're
it's always adding to, not taking away from. But you can effectively, through wording, nullify. But yeah,
you'd be this part of the Constitution is null and void. Or this does not apply. That does not apply anymore.
Yeah,
we're kind of lost in the weeds here.
We are kind of. I don't have strong disagreement with you about what you said about originalists, but what is your disagreement then?
I just brought in someone to argue about it. There it is.
Okay. The champion has arrived.
I just came here for a second because I was a little bit confused about Pisco's argument. I'm not exactly... So basically you're saying that the Constitution is up for amendment, therefore an originalist has to be okay with the Constitution being amended. And obviously I think that's true. But I think that there are, at least when the Federalist Papers were being written, when they were talking about the Bill of Rights, even though you can technically amend an amendment away, right? You can say, okay, let's get rid of the First Amendment, let's get rid of the Second Amendment. An originalist would argue that people have those rights inherently, or those rights weren't enumerated by the Constitution, but they were rights that people had regardless of whether the government accepted that or not. So even if you technically took away those rights, those people would still be entitled to those rights. Does that make sense?
I would understand it under the rubric of natural law, someone who's a natural law proponent. I don't think that that's an inherent position that all originalists have to take by virtue of being originalists. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Why are you guys all coughing and sick today? What the fuck is happening? Jesus.
It's just him. It's just him.
No, the Kalinda person was coughing and had issues when they came in as well. You guys are all on some fucking shit today. Whatever.
Is this contagious?
Okay, sorry.
An originalist is not. Originalists could think that the First Amendment's a bad idea. There could be an originalist who thinks the Second Amendment is a bad idea, and that there is no natural law. There could be an atheist originalist who thinks that they're not endowed by any enlightenment or humanitarianism or God with certain rights. And so I think originalism is a way of reading law, a way of reading text, and it's not marrying you to any particular view on natural law or the wiseness of any particular individual right.
Wait, I'm confused. So you think that there can be originalists who basically do not believe in the original founding principles of the Constitution? Because I'm confused.
Yeah. So originalism is a way of reading, a style of reading constitutional and statutory text. It's not a normative position on whether democracy is okay or whether. Although I would say that originalists often have normative reasons to support originalism. That is, they'll say it's better for democracy. It's more responsive to democracy if you're responding to the way people think words mean. So they'll play into I guess a lot of their normative reasons for originalism. But there could be a ton of different normative reasons for originalism as well. You could say originalism is the best because it produces the most conservative results, and that would be a different normative backing for for originalism, but it doesn't marry you to any particular normative view on the rightness or wrongness of the founding of the Constitution.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I would have to think a little bit more before I can like make a claim on that statement, because like my first instinct or thought is, okay, if you believe that, you know, originalism is the best way to handle things, that's the way that it should be, I would, you know, guess that you should agree with the founding principles of originalism. But I would have to think more. Like, I guess.
What do you mean the founding principles of originalism?
Or the whole idea that like, okay, like, you know, we should interpret the Constitution as close as to when like the founding fathers implemented it, basically, or try to keep to that as much as possible. So that already has like baked in like presuppositions of.
Okay, then we just have a disagreement on what originalism means. I mean, I would understand originalism to me to look at the text of something, right? Call it a statute or a constitutional provision, and to read it and interpret it. The words that are used, or the purpose. There's different flavors of originalism. It could be original purpose or original textualism. But original textualism is like I guess the most common, most cited version. That's the Scalia version. To use what people thought about that thing, constitutional provision, and what it means at the time. And so there could be a law that says women are banned from bathrooms. And an originalist would say, all right, well, what did those words mean at the time? Original textualists would say, what do the words mean at the time that text was enacted? The woman in 1920, when this amendment was passed, meant X, biological women. Bathroom meant places where whatever, that's how it was understood. We look at the dictionary in the 1920s when this hypothetical amendment was passed, and that's how we do it. It is not marrying you to any particular frame of government or any like policy position. It's a way of reading constitutional and statutory enactments.
Yeah, the way that I always put it is an originalist will analyze the wording of a constitutional amendment, or the Constitution or the amendment, through the lens of the culture and purpose of the time, right? So understanding what was going on at the time when that wording was written and interpreting the language based on that. So that means if you have an amendment that was made, that was ratified in 2003, you would look at it through the lens of 2003, not through the lens of today or prior.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'm just a little bit confused, because at least in the way that I've heard originalists use most often is that, oh, not just should we do that, but we should basically, when we're interpreting the Constitution now, or when we're deciding to like decide what legislation is okay or not, we should keep as much as possible to the original meaning of the Constitution and the way that
like
was
the founders, right?
Yes,
that's because that's where most of the relevant constitutional text that we're applying, other than the 14th Amendment and others in the Reconstruction amendments, most of that, you know, Article 1, Article 2, or the major articles, the structure of the Constitution happened at the founding and haven't been significantly changed since then. So that's why, as just a matter of, like, if you had passed an amendment that totally changes how a bill becomes a law, then originalists should care not about what the framers thought, but they should care about what the people who enacted this big, massive change to Article 1 are. But it just happens to be the case that a lot of the major provisions that we're worried about on a day-to-day basis, that was enacted either at the framing or in Reconstruction.
So just to clarify, would an originalist argue like, oh, we should keep to that? Or are you saying that no, like an originalist is okay with
most probably will, right? Like most originalists you talk to will probably be against getting rid of the First and Second Amendment, but I don't know that it would have to, right? You could be an originalist and say, I want to get rid of the First Amendment, and there'd be nothing inconsistent about that. Or I'm an originalist, I want to have a king.
My argument for what I think originalists oftentimes miss out on and probably should be more cognizant of is that I think based on what I was saying before, right? If you take a look at something like the Ninth Amendment, that sets a pretty clear tone and precedent for the future going forward in how it is that the Constitution is utilized and how it is amended, as well as how it is interpreted. Now, I think I would agree with you that one thing that could be done is that they could do an amendment that effectively nullifies or rewords the Ninth Amendment And then going forward from there, they would have to interpret it in whatever lens going forward from there. Like, I think that is sort of should be, since originalists seem to be really tied to interpreting it really back at the founding of the nation, not so much in the time in which an amendment was written. Well, I think that they should probably follow that precedent then. The Ninth Amendment sort of sets a very strong tone going forward until somebody amends that away.
If you consider Scalia to be an authoritative spokesperson for the originalist frame of thinking, Scalia never thought the Ninth Amendment was a source of fundamental rights to individuals. He thought it was a rule of construction that was merely repeating what was already known at the time, and he made fun of people who used the Ninth Amendment, namely abortion advocates, for deriving some kind of fundamental rights. So
it's supposed to be like an underlying guiding principle, effectively, is the way it's often been used, right? It's like it's not anything explicit. It's meant to be kept in mind when considering ruling on something that is not necessarily an enumerated right, right? And so it really is sort of a underlying guiding principle in decision making and such. Scalia, shitting on it is kind of, I don't know if he would be considered to be like an authority on originalism.
He's like the most famous originalist.
Yeah, but okay, I don't know. Do they elect their leaders or something and their representatives?
No, but he's like an intellectual powerhouse of the originalist movement. Like, originalism has exploded in its popularity in response to Scalia. I mean, Amy Coney Barrett is like inspired, but who's like, I would say, an originalist. I would say Clarence Thomas is an originalist as well. He I think is kind of a different vein of originalist than Scalia, but in many ways they're very similar in how they approach things. It's all about history.
This kind of goes back into what I was saying, that I think that the big problem with originalists is that they're really cherry picking based on their own personal biases. Yeah. They're not really sticking to. Yeah, they're not really sticking to the what they're saying that they're advocating for, what they're saying that they're doing.
It's the easiest, like, if you want like an easy debate strategy, if you want like a little dialogue tree, I'll give you guys a hint when you're talking to originalists. If you were ever talking
dialogue trees, though,
here's the dialogue tree for y'all, and it is Brown v. Board, which is if you're taking an originalist perspective, you're looking at what the words meant at the time that they were enacted. And so we have the Equal Protection Clause as the basis of Brown v. Board of Education. Does anyone think that at the time in the 1860s, when they were talking about equal protection of the law, and that states shall not deprive individuals in their states, persons, from the equal protection of their laws, did anyone think that what they were doing was getting rid of school segregation in the 1860s? Fuck no. No one thought that that's what the text meant, that all of a sudden you pass this text and you have to get rid of all your segregated schools. It took 100 years for that to occur. And no one thought at the time, furthermore, no one thought at the time of the Equal Protection Clause was written that this was going to apply to women. Right? The Equal Protection Clause applies to women. No one thought that when we were passing this amendment, we were actually saying that women have to be treated with
wouldn't they just sidestep your whole argument and say, yeah, I agree, that's why they should have either passed an amendment or something? Wouldn't they just say that?
But then you have this. No one wants to say Brown v. Board was wrongly decided.
You don't think they would want? You don't think they wouldn't want to say that?
I don't think. I think that
they would say Brown v. Board was wrongly decided, and there should have been a constitutional amendment instead.
I think that you'll find few lawyers who are willing to say Brown v. Board was wrongly decided. That's my take and perspective after talking to a lot of originalists and people online.
What do you think, like Nick Rekieta would say? Do you think he would? Do you think he would say that?
Who?
Do you think Nick Rekieta would be like, oh, no, I do agree with Brown v. Board? Or do you think he'd say, no, fuck it. It was a shitty Supreme Court decision. They should have passed an amendment.
I bet, and I'm willing to bet $100 on this, that if you asked Nick Rekieta, was Brown v. Board rightly or wrongly decided, he would say it's rightly decided.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
You want to bet on it?
No, I don't know him well enough. I'll try to ask him though.
How about I'll give you 100 and you have to put up 10.
Well, honestly, the most annoying thing is figure out. I don't even know how I would pay you.
I'll put up.
How about whoever's right? How about whoever's right has to pay, or the other person pays dinner next time we hang out? Okay.
I want one more thing though.
Okay.
If I'm right.
Oh shit! I know what you're gonna say. The orange.
No, not the orange.
Oh.
Wii U.
Oh, no, that's an RTBA thing. You gotta...
No.
Talk to him. I don't know why RTBA nuked it. There's gotta be... I feel like... Here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna bring it back, and I'm gonna be like, oh, it's not a big deal. And then RTBA is gonna send me like 52 logs. And be like, you don't understand. Like, the literal, like, fucking Palestinians are being murdered because this guy in chat, like, made 52 different alts on your Surfshark VPN
Who are you gonna listen to? Give it a chance. You said at the start of the year that you were, like, getting rid of all prior bad relationships, and you were rebuilding every single bridge. Rebuild it with your own emote.
Tabula rasa.
Just do it.
Okay, you know what? I'll see if it still exists in the back end. Give me a sec. Let me kill these monsters. We'll see if it's there.
Alrighty. Anyway, back to the boring conversation. Yeah, so like I think equal protection stuff and like getting to people's priors about whether or not women should have rights under the equal protection clause, whether or not Brown v. Board was rightly decided, you know, test whether or not they're really committed to originalism. Do you think
that a lot of people's claims of originalism is more just like a quick dismissal of criticisms for their own biased cherry picking of how it is that they interpret things?
Dismissal of originalism?
No, that like if somebody claims that they're originalist, it's oftentimes seems like a like at least not with SCOTUS justices, but like in general, I find this is my interpretation.
Hold on, I'm sorry, real quick. I just need to. Okay, RTBA, why should this emote stay banned? Tell the chat. Tell me right now. Go ahead. RTBA is getting mad in chat. I don't know why this emote is banned. I never. Pisco, can you still man his argument for what you think he's about to say?
I have no idea what the fuck he's gonna say. It should be back.
Here, this is what I heard. Apparently people made a plugin for a golden weow. So people were spamming the weow to get the golden weow. But that sounds so fucking stupid because then couldn't people make a plugin to get rid of any emote? Yeah, that just seems so dumb. So there must be another, it can't be that stupid. There must be like another reason.
We'll have to interpret it through the lens of what was going on at the time.
It's time. It's time to give Weow a second chance. We're not cancel culture.
Oh, speaking of which, Destiny. Every time I hop on here, multiple people in DGG say, "Ask Destiny for the role or whatever, the fancy color."
Oh, I've got like a document where I'm redoing a bunch of shit soon, so we'll see about that. Okay.
All right.
There you go, buddy. Well, I don't know what RTBA is gonna do, but good luck.
I think that RTBA and I can get into like a deal of some kind.
Yeah.
I have some stuff that I can give him.
Okay.
Like I can give him some help if he needs some help.
Like legal help?
If he wants money. I'm not saying legal help, but you know, I have a lot of your people in your community asking me for stuff. I'm not gonna interact with Darius anymore.
Why? Really?
Yeah.
What happened?
I thought he had a good heart.
You don't think he has a good heart? Oh my god.
But like, he just puts himself in situations.
Oh, so now there's a level of self-destructiveness
it's bad for my mental health to be like, no, don't do that.
You mean is hanging out with Grace and everything?
I'm not gonna mention any specific things, but that.
And watching it from the screen, you're like, no, don't do it. No, just walk away. Leave. Don't ever go back. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much more to discuss here. I was just thinking, you know, it was more of like an exploration of these concepts and what I see in originalism versus, you know, what we see in practice. It's something I think about a lot. Like, to me, I think it's really... I find it to be a really interesting exploration to go through what the principles were of the time and why it was that certain decisions were made. And it really kind of...
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Like
I understand. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, go ahead.
Like, it has intuitive appeal to people. Why? Because no one wants the feeling that there are some philosopher kings who, other than Rage Pope.
Wait, did he delete it from the site? Wait, why? Wait, why? You were a bitch. He knows. I told him. Dumb fucks like Pisco are why it's not coming back. There you go. It's deleted on the back end now. You didn't even read what I said. You didn't say anything. You didn't say anything.
You're gonna let this happen? You're gonna let this happen?
Let's see.
What a precedent to
RTVA,
send.
Control F. Wow. We've searched your search results on Discord. It says nothing.
You're gonna let this happen, bro?
I don't know why. I don't know why.
This is like Prigozhin.
It came back and now it's gone. I truly have no idea. Go read the 50 times I've said it. You're a bitch. He knows. I have told him. Yep, just like bar, BBDGG shit. It encourages spam and dumb behavior. We couldn't do shit about extensions at the time. But we can now, so I don't understand. Does ITV have some kind of blackmail on you? Maybe. I don't.
Don't get bored by this. Don't get bored. You need to keep that fire in your belly. Don't get bored.
For Weow?
Yeah. You're gonna let this occur? He deleted on the back end Weow? That's your emo. That's
make a royal proclamation that RTBA is in a state of rebellion. Okay, the colony is in rebellion. Time to act on it.
Okay, I'll look at it later. Okay, I'll see what I can do, Pisco.
You promise? Do you promise?
I promise you. Yeah, I'll put it on my doc of things I've got to do. All
right.
Hold on.
All right. Oh.
Weow emote. There you go. It's on my sticky pad.
Oh damn. We're getting it. This is in the name of Pepe, by the way. But yeah. What were we talking about? I'm about to end, but
I don't know. I feel like we've kind of petered out at this point.
Yeah, we petered out. I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna leave you with this. I think people like originalism because ultimately they don't like the feeling of like judges just deciding what the law is tomorrow. But originalism doesn't really help you in any kind of way that the other judicial philosophies do, in the sense that like it's still open to the same kind of abuses that people are talking about, just by cherry picking and by making exceptions or levels of generality or abstraction that you think are useful. And I think that it's important also for non-originalists, they should also be taken into consideration the original meaning and text. They're just taking into consideration other things as well that aren't the original public meaning, like how the meaning has developed over time, or precedent that's happened since then that has shifted our understanding of what those words mean. So yeah, that's kind of my take. I think that limiting yourself to just the one source of evidence for the meaning of text is kind of cringe.
Yeah. You might be right about that. That's definitely something I need to think about. I've been wanting to have a conversation with originalists and kind of get them on and like really hash a bunch of this stuff out, but I'm never really sure who to call on for that kind of thing. So I don't know. I could call on Lactoid, but I don't know. I want people who I've seen to demonstrate pretty strong and consistent originalism principles.
Yeah. I'll probably talk to Lactoid again at some point. I think someone's organizing something about the student loan thing.
Damn.
But now that I have Destiny on my side on that,
well, I don't know about that.
You're on my side. Wait, you're such a little fucker.
What?
You don't commit yourself to positions.
Not yet. Well, I just want to see what the Supreme Court guy said about it.
You gotta wait until you get enough information, right? I respect that. Anyways, I'm gonna drop off.
Later, guys.
See ya.